We all know Shaquille O'Neal as the legendary NBA superstar who dominated the court. But on one unforgettable Miami night, it wasn't his slam dunks that left people speechless. It was his response to two police officers who pulled over his custom Lamborghini. They thought they had caught just another wealthy black man in an expensive car. They couldn't have been more wrong. As the officers approached his vehicle, hands hovering near their weapons, they had no idea they were about to become part of something much bigger than a routine traffic stop. They didn't know about the mysterious phone calls Shaq had received earlier that day, or about the USB drive in his pocket that would change everything. What happened next would shake the Miami Police Department to its core and prove that sometimes the most powerful plays happen far from the basketball court. But to understand why Shaq was really on Ocean Drive that night, we need to go back to where it all began. The Miami moonlight danced off the sleek black surface of Shaquille O'Neal's custom Lamborghini as it purred down Ocean Drive. The clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m., and the usually packed streets were nearly empty, just the way Shaq liked it. He adjusted his large frame in the driver's seat, which had been specially modified to fit his 7-foot-1-inch height. The car might have cost more than some houses, but tonight it felt like a cage. Something wasn't right. His phone buzzed again. That made 5 times since the strange call this afternoon. Shaq glanced at the screen but didn't pick it up. The number was blocked, just like before. "Keep your eyes on the mission," he whispered to himself, his deep voice barely audible over the engine's rumble. The words echoed in his mind, just like they had during countless NBA championships. But this was different. This wasn't about basketball anymore. A police cruiser caught his eye in the rearview mirror. It had been following him for the last 3 blocks, keeping its distance. Shaq's massive hands tightened on the steering wheel. He knew what was coming. He'd been through it before, back when he was just another tall black kid in a nice car. The memory of his first car, a beat-up Chevy he'd bought with his first paycheck, floated through his mind. Back then, police stops were scary. But now they were part of the plan. His cell phone lit up again. This time, a text message. "Are you ready?" Shaq took a deep breath. The USB drive in his pocket felt heavy, like it carried the weight of secrets that could change everything. He thought about his kids, his fans, and all the young people who looked up to him. What he was about to do would show them that being a hero wasn't just about scoring points or winning games. The police cruiser was closer now. A second one had appeared, moving into position behind the first. In the quiet midnight air, Shaq could hear their engines, like predators stalking their prey. "Showtime," he mumbled, checking his mirrors again. The cameras hidden throughout his car were running. He'd made sure of that before leaving home. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be recorded. The streets of Miami stretched out before him, palm trees swaying in the warm breeze. Music drifted from a distant club, a steady beat that matched his heart rate. He'd driven these streets hundreds of times, but tonight they felt different. Tonight, they felt like destiny. His phone buzzed one final time. The message was simple. "Good luck, Diesel." Only a handful of people knew that old nickname. Shaq allowed himself a small smile, remembering the agent's words from last week. "We chose you because no one would suspect. You're hiding in plain sight." Red and blue lights suddenly exploded in his mirrors, painting the inside of his car in alternating colors. The first police cruiser had finally made its move. The second one followed suit, its siren giving a short whoop as if to announce its presence. Shaq checked his mirrors one last time, noting how the officers positioned their vehicles. Everything was happening exactly as predicted. He eased his foot off the gas, steering toward the curb with practiced precision. The Lamborghini came too, a stop under a streetlight, its black paint gleaming like polished obsidian. In his side mirror, he watched the officers emerge from their vehicles. Their hands rested on their weapons. Standard procedure, they'd say later. But Shaq knew better. He could see the tension in their movements, the way they approached his car like they were expecting trouble. If they only knew who was really in trouble tonight. The first officer's flashlight beam cut through his window, illuminating the interior of his custom sports car. Shaq kept his massive hands visible on the steering wheel, just like he'd been instructed. In a few minutes, everything would change. But for now, he just had to play his part. "License and registration," a voice called out from the darkness behind the flashlight beam. "Sir, do you know why we stopped you tonight?" Shaq's mouth felt dry. The next few words would set everything in motion. There would be no going back. After this, he opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, his phone lit up one final time. The message on the screen made his heart skip a beat. The message glowed in the darkness. "Officer Martinez isn't who he claims to be. Be careful." Shaq's mind raced. Which one was Martinez? He studied the approaching officers in his mirror, trying to match faces to the photos he'd memorized during last week's briefing. The shorter one walked with a slight limp. That had to be Williams, which meant the taller one, the one whose hand hadn't left his weapon, was Martinez. "Sir, step out of the vehicle slowly," Martinez called out, his voice carrying an edge that didn't match standard police procedure. The memory of his first traffic stop hit Shaq like a splash of cold water. He'd been 17, driving his mama's car to basketball practice. That day, he'd learned how quickly fear could turn a routine stop into something dangerous. But he wasn't that scared teenager anymore. "Evening, officers," Shaq said, keeping his voice steady and friendly as he carefully opened the door. "Is there a problem?" Both officers took involuntary steps back as his full height unfolded from the car. 7 feet and 1 inch of NBA legend. Tends to have that effect on people. Williams's eyes widened with recognition, but Martinez's expression didn't change. "Shaq? Shaquille O'Neal?" Williams lowered his flashlight. "Man, my kids are huge fans. They're not gonna believe this." Martinez cut him off. "We're not here for autographs, Williams. Sir, we've had reports of a vehicle matching this description involved in suspicious activity." Shaq noticed Martinez's accent slip for just a moment. Another red flag. The USB drive felt heavier than ever in his pocket as he reached for his license and registration with deliberate slowness. "Happy to help clear things up," Shaq said, handing over his documents. "Though I gotta admit, this feels a little familiar." "Familiar?" Williams asked, curiosity getting the better of him. "Being pulled over for driving while black in a nice car." Shaq's tone remained light, but his words carried weight. "Used to happen all the time before people knew my face. Still happens sometimes." Williams had the decency to look embarrassed, but Martinez's expression hardened. "This isn't about race, sir. We're just doing our job." "Course you are," Shaq agreed easily. "Just like those officers in '92 were doing their job. Or the ones in '95. Or last month in Atlanta. More patrol cars were arriving now, their lights painting Ocean Drive in red and blue stripes. This was supposed to happen. It was part of the plan. But something felt off. There were too many cars, too many officers. The USB drive suddenly felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. "Sir, are you carrying any weapons or contraband?" Martinez asked, taking a step closer. His right hand still hadn't left his gun. "No, sir," Shaq replied. "Though I should mention I'm a reserve police officer myself." Badge is in my wallet, if you'd like to see it. That seemed to throw Martinez off script. His eye twitched. Another tell. Behind him, Williams was running Shaq's license through their system. Any minute now, the results would come back, and things would get interesting. Shaq's phone vibrated again. He knew better than to reach for it, but he caught a glimpse of the screen through his car window. 3 words that confirmed his worst fears. They know, stand by. Martinez was speaking into his radio now, using a code Shaq didn't recognize. More officers were approaching, forming a loose circle around the Lamborghini. In the distance, he heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. This was something else entirely. "Sir," Martinez said, his hand finally moving from his weapon, but only to reach for something in his back pocket. "We're going to need to search your vehicle." Shaq squared his shoulders, towering over both officers. The cameras were rolling. The USB drive was secure. Everything was in place. Now came the moment of truth. The real reason he'd agreed to this insane plan in the first place. "Actually, officers," he said, his voice carrying the same authority that had commanded NBA courts for decades. "I think there's something you need to see first." Martinez's hand froze halfway to his back pocket. In the distance, the helicopter's spotlight snapped on, bathing them all in harsh white light. And that's when everything went sideways. The helicopter's spotlight wasn't supposed to be part of the plan. In the harsh white light, Shaq caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. Martinez wasn't reaching for handcuffs. The object in his back pocket had the distinct shape of a small evidence bag. They were going to plant something on him. "Central, we've got a 10:45 at Ocean and 5th, Williams was saying into his radio, but his voice wavered. Even he seemed unsure about what was happening now. The radio crackled back with static. "No response," I said. "Central, do you copy?" Williams tried again. More static. Martinez's face twisted into something ugly. "Radio's dead. Must be interference. From the helicopter." But Shaq knew better. The FBI had warned him this might happen. Radio blackout was the first sign that the corrupt officers were making their move. Right now, somewhere in the city, other agents were monitoring every transmission, or lack thereof. "You know what?" Shaq said, his voice carrying over the whop-whop-whop of the helicopter blades. "I just remembered something interesting about this car." "Sir, keep your hands where we can see them," Martinez snapped, but Shaq could hear the nervousness creeping into his voice. "It's got some pretty amazing features," Shaq continued calmly. "Custom seats, special suspension, and about 15 hidden cameras." That got their attention. Williams's flashlight beam wavered. Martinez's face went pale. More police cars were arriving, but these were different. Unmarked vehicles with tinted windows. The kind that federal agents drive. The kind that Martinez and his crew hadn't been expecting. "Those cameras have been recording everything," Shaq said. "Every word, every move. That little evidence bag you're reaching for? That's on video too." The USB drive in his pocket didn't just contain proof of past corruption. It was also receiving live feeds from every camera in his car, uploading directly to FBI servers. The basketball star they'd tried to frame was actually their worst nightmare, a willing participant in the biggest police corruption sting in Miami history. Martinez's hand finally emerged from his back pocket, empty. But now he was speaking rapidly into a small black device that definitely wasn't standard police equipment. "Abort! Abort! It's a set!" He never finished the sentence. The night exploded. Into action. FBI agents seemed to materialize from nowhere. Weapons drawn. The helicopter spotlight swung wild as more lights flashed on, turning night into day. Commands echoed across Ocean Drive. "Federal agents, hands up, on your knees." "Don't move!" Williams immediately dropped to his knees, hands raised. He'd been kept in the dark about his partner's real activities, and the shock on his face was genuine. But Martinez had other plans. He lunged for Shaq's car door, probably hoping to plant the evidence anyway, to salvage something from the operation. Gone wrong. But he'd forgotten one important detail. Shaq wasn't just a basketball player. With reflexes honed by years on the court, Shaq moved with surprising speed for a man his size. His massive hand caught Martinez's wrist in mid-reach. One gentle squeeze was all it took. The evidence bag dropped to the pavement, its contents scattering across the street. Unmarked pills that would have been found in Shaq's car if things had gone according to Martinez's plan. "Game over," Shaq said quietly, holding the corrupt officer in place until agents could secure him. As Martinez was being handcuffed, his fake accent completely gone now, he spat words at Shaq. "You don't know what you've done. You don't know who you're dealing with." Shaq watched as the officers were separated, as evidence was collected, as the pills were photographed where they'd fallen. His phone buzzed one last time. The message was simple. Phase 1, complete. Ready for Phase 2? Because this wasn't just about catching a few corrupt cops. The pills, the USB drive, the elaborate setup. It was all leading to something bigger, something that would shake the Miami Police Department to its core. As if reading his thoughts, Martinez called out from the back of a federal vehicle, "You think this is over? This is just the beginning." For once, Shaq agreed with him. This was just the beginning. And as more unmarked cars arrived and men in suits started coordinating with the helicopter crews, Shaq realized that his long night was about to get even longer. Phase 2 was about to begin, and it would make this traffic stop look like a simple game of basketball. Special Agent Sarah Chen emerged from one of the unmarked vehicles, her FBI windbreaker reflecting the helicopter's searchlight. She walked straight to Shaq, her expression grim. "They took the bait," she said quietly, showing him her tablet. On the screen, dozens of text messages were popping up in real time. Martinez's crew is scrambling. They think their operation is blown, but they don't realize what we're really after. Shaq nodded, remembering the briefing that had started this whole thing. 1 week ago, he'd been planning to spend this evening at home with his kids. Then the FBI had shown up at his door with evidence of something much bigger than a few corrupt cops planting evidence. "How long until they call him?" Shaq asked. "Any minute now. You sure you're ready for this?" Before he could answer, Martinez's phone started ringing from inside the FBI vehicle. The sound cut through the noise of the helicopter and the chaos of the crime scene. Everyone froze. Agent Chen pressed a button on her tablet, and Martinez's phone call played through her devices. Speaker. A computerized voice spoke 5 words. "The package arrives at midnight." Shaq checked his watch. 11:52 p.m., 8 minutes. "Right on schedule," Agent Chen said, but her voice was tense. "Just like your contact said it would happen." The memory of that contact, the real reason he'd agreed to help the FBI, flashed through Shaq's mind. 3 days ago, a young rookie cop had shown up at his house in tears. She'd discovered something terrible about her precinct, something that went way beyond normal corruption. But she needed help proving it. That rookie's brother had been Shaq's teammate back in his Orlando days. When she'd shown him the evidence, he knew he had to help. What he didn't know was how deep the rabbit hole would go. Package is a funny way to describe 3 tons of drugs hidden in police evidence bags, Shaq said, his voice barely a whisper. Agent Chen nodded. They've been using seized evidence to smuggle new product. Hide it in plain sight. Who's going to search a police evidence van? Around them, FBI agents were quickly changing into Miami PD uniforms. The real police cars were being replaced with FBI vehicles painted to look identical. Even the helicopter was part of the charade, keeping locals away from what would look like a routine police operation. Martinez was just a test, Agent Chen continued. They needed to make sure their blackmail on him would stick. If they could force a decorated officer to plant evidence on a celebrity, then they could force anyone to help move their product, Shaq finished. But they didn't count on him having a conscience or a wife who kept records. Mrs. Martinez had been the one to contact the FBI first, terrified that her husband's behavior was getting stranger by the day. The evidence bag tonight wasn't just about framing Shaq. It was Martinez's initiation into something bigger. Shaq's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a live video feed from his home security system. His kids were safe, sound asleep, with 2 FBI agents disguised as babysitters watching over them. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. 4 minutes, Agent Chen said, checking her watch. The evidence van will turn onto Ocean Drive, thinking they're meeting Martinez's crew. Instead, they'll meet the real police, Shaq finished. The ones who actually protect and serve. A new voice crackled over Agent Chen's radio. Target vehicle approaching from the north. 3 occupants, weapons visible. This was the moment everything could go wrong. If the smugglers spotted anything unusual, if they realized this wasn't their usual pickup, dozens of lives could be at risk. "I should get out of sight," Shaq said. But Agent Chen grabbed his arm. "Actually, we need you front and center. You're our best distraction." She was right. Who wouldn't stop to stare at Shaquille O'Neal standing in the middle of a police scene? It was the perfect cover for the agents taking position in the shadows. The evidence van's headlights appeared at the end of the street. It was driving slowly, cautiously. In the back of the FBI vehicle, Martinez started thrashing against his restraints, trying to warn them. "Showtime," Agent Chen said, smoothly replacing her FBI windbreaker with a Miami PD jacket. "You ready for the performance of your life?" Shaq squared his shoulders, thinking about that rookie cop, about Martinez's wife, about all the people these criminals had hurt. He'd won championships, made movies, even released rap albums. But this might be his most important performance yet. The van was getting closer. 30 seconds now. "Just one thing," Shaq said, his voice deadly serious. "When this is over, when it's safe, I want 5 minutes alone with whoever's behind this. Not to hurt them, just to ask one question." What question? Why they thought they could get away with this in my city? The van turned the final corner. Showtime, indeed. The white evidence van crawled down Ocean Drive like a shark sensing danger. Its headlights cut through the Miami night, illuminating the elaborate scene before it. Police cars, flashing lights, and the largest man any of them had ever seen in person. Shaq stood in plain view, his massive frame impossible to miss. The van's brakes squealed as the driver spotted him. "Just as planned. They're stopping," Agent Chen whispered into her radio. "Everyone hold!" The van doors flew open before the vehicle fully stopped. 3 figures jumped out, wearing Miami PD uniforms that almost perfectly matched the real thing. Almost. "What's the holdup?" the driver called out, trying to sound casual. "We've got a schedule to keep." That's when Shaq saw him, really saw him, and everything clicked into place. The driver's voice was familiar, but not from any police briefing. He knew it from basketball. Tommy "the Shark" Rodriguez, former NBA referee. Memories flooded back, controversial calls, games that ended strangely. betting lines that shifted at the last minute. The pieces were fitting together like a puzzle Shaq hadn't known he was solving. "Well, if it isn't the Diesel himself," Tommy said, recognition crossing his face. "Long way from the court, aren't you?" "Could say the same to you, Shaq," replied, his voice carrying across the street. "Refs usually stick to fixing games, not running drugs." Tommy's fake smile vanished. His hand twitched toward his waistband, but he froze when he noticed the red dots from laser sights dancing across his chest. "Nobody's fixing anything," Tommy said carefully. "This is a legitimate evidence transfer. We have paperwork." "Like the paperwork you had when you called those fouls in Game 6? Shaq asked. "The ones that cost Miami the championship? The ones that made certain people very rich?" The other two men were slowly backing toward the van. They didn't make it. 3 steps before FBI agents materialized from the shadows, weapons drawn. "You know what I could never figure out?" Shaq continued, walking closer to Tommy. "How a referee on a league salary could afford 3 houses and a yacht. Now it all makes sense. The games were just practice for this, weren't they? Learning to hide things in plain sight." Tommy's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand anything. Do you know what they pay us? What we risk every night making calls while millionaires like you—" "Save it for your testimony," Agent Chen cut in, stepping forward with her badge raised. "FBI, everyone on the ground, now." The night erupted into chaos. Tommy's men surrendered immediately, but the Shark had one last play. He pulled something from his jacket. Not a weapon, but a phone. "One call," he sneered. "That's all it takes. One call and certain evidence about certain games goes public. The league will never recover. Your legacy, all those championships, people will question everything." Shaq smiled. A real smile. The IB kind that used to terrify opponents on the court. "Make the call," he said. "Because while you were busy threatening me, my friend here was busy too." Agent Chen held up her tablet. On the screen, dozens of files were uploading to FBI servers. Betting records, offshore accounts, years of text messages between Tommy and his crew. "We didn't just get into Martinez's phone," she said. "We got into everything, the whole network." "It's over, Tommy." The phone slipped from Tommy's fingers, clattering on the pavement. As agents moved in to cuff him, Shaq stepped close one last time. "You asked why I'm here, so far from the court? This is my city. These are my people. And no one, not corrupt cops, not crooked refs, not anyone, messes with either." As Tommy was led away, Agent Chen turned to Shaq. "Not bad for a basketball player." Actually, Shaq reached into his pocket and finally pulled out that USB drive. But it wasn't a drive at all. It was a badge. His badge. "That's Reserve Officer O'Neill to you." The helicopter's spotlight dimmed as sunrise began painting the Miami sky in shades of orange and pink. Evidence teams swarmed the van, documenting the biggest drug bust in the city's history. Somewhere in the distance, news vans were already racing toward Ocean Drive, hungry for the story of the century. But Shaq wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the rookie cop who'd been brave enough to speak up, about Martinez's wife, who'd helped them catch dirty cops, about all the people who choose to do the right thing, even when it's hard. His phone buzzed one final time, a message from his kids. "Dad, you're all over the news. Are you really a secret agent?" Shaq laughed, a deep rumble that seemed to shake the early morning air. "No," he typed back. "Just a guy who loves this game called Justice." And as the sun rose over Miami, Shaquille O'Neal, basketball legend, reserve police officer, and now corruption buster, walked back to his custom Lamborghini. There would be questions, interviews, and paperwork. Lots of paperwork. But for now, He just wanted to go home and hug his kids. Maybe tell them a story about how sometimes the biggest plays happen off the court, and how the real heroes don't always wear jerseys. Sometimes they wear badges, and sometimes, just sometimes, they do both. But Shaquille O'Neal's encounters with prejudice didn't end with traffic stops. In another unforgettable moment, a first-class passenger learned the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. When she tried to prevent the NBA legend from boarding first class, claiming he couldn't afford it, Shaq's response left everyone in the terminal speechless. His words that day proved once again that true class has nothing to do with a plane ticket. Want to know what Shaq said that made this woman's jaw drop? Click below to witness another powerful moment when the basketball legend showed that the biggest moves don't always happen on the court. Sometimes they happen at 30,000 feet. Like, share, and subscribe to see more stories about sports legends who prove that greatness isn't just about what you achieve. It's about how you treat others along the way.